All right. I am live, I see. If I can get this light to go right. And now. Okay. All right. So we are live. Hello. Hello. Hi, everybody. And welcome. How you guys doing? Of course, I still don't know how to work this thing. I'm trying. What I'm trying to work is the chat. I know how to work this thing, but not the chat. Let me see this. Of course, they give me a bunch of information that I have to look at later. Anyway, welcome, guys. Happy Sunday. It's good to see all of you. So, if you guys remember correctly, today we're here to discuss the book Being Me, Loving You by Marshall Rosenberg. So, I'm going to give a second. Hey, hey, Shell. So, I'm going to give a second for everybody to come in. And if you have a book, to get out your book, because one of the things we have to do today is we have to do some writing. So even if you don't have the book that we're working on, our discussion book, please get a pen and some paper, or a notebook and some paper, because today they have us doing an exercise. If you guys remember correctly, I told you that this week we're actually starting to learn how to do the technique. First, they had us talking a little bit and understanding some things. Now they're going to have us actually start the technique. There's two parts to the technique. The first part is giving, and the second part is receiving. So we're going to talk about the first part today, and we're going to answer some questions. They gave us 4 questions to answer. So if you can get a pen and paper, that would be great. You'll be able to jot down your answers. Now, your answers are going to be very specific, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about later. But we have to word them and do the emotions correctly. So it's going to be a little bit. So let's get started, guys. The first thing I wanted to do was, the last time we spoke, I had 3 questions in the comment section that I wanted to answer before we got started. So let's talk about those first, and then we'll get into the main topic of today. So first of all, someone asked me, when using nonviolent communication, how do I handle personal hangups and communicating my needs? Well, today we're going to understand how to communicate your needs. That's what this whole exercise is going to be about, how to speak your needs with empathy. And we'll talk a little bit about personal hangups as we go along as well. Marshall does address that. Number 2, how does one implement this conversation into a new relationship? So let's say that you have a brand new relationship and you want to implement nonviolent communication into your relationship. Now, this is a wonderful idea in a new relationship. It's a wonderful idea in any relationship, but I would think that it would be easier to start from the beginning versus having a pattern established of how you deal with your partner and then try to start doing nonviolent communication. So actually, if you're in a brand new relationship or if you're single, this is a great time to learn this so you could be doing it from day one. And for those of us who've already been with somebody for a while, you can still do it. It's just going to take their willingness to do it. Okay? So, yes. So, in a new relationship, how would you implement it? Well, personally, I would start off by reading the book together and discussing it. It's very, very simple. You already have a copy, get them a copy, and the two of you discuss it. Because if you're in a new relationship, you're typically in your 90-day honeymoon period. So, this is a great time for the two of you to talk about stuff like this. So, I would say get the other person a copy of the book Have your own copy of the book and talk about it maybe over coffee or wine or whatever, and discuss it and discuss how you can implement it and practice it. Because as you're going to see throughout the book, they're going to help us practice using it. First, they discuss how to use it, then they have us practice using it. So if you're in a new relationship, that's how I would introduce it. And then the last question says, ah, this one, it was more of a comment, and she wanted me to speak on this one. It says that some of these dynamics, especially as they pertain to gender, don't just happen in male female relationships. They happen in all types of relationships: female female, male male, so forth and so on. So this person was saying here, this is a woman, and she was saying that this also happens in the lesbian community, a femme and a stud relationship. Studs have to guess what the femme wants. So again, I've seen this many times, and this is people take on the role. They take on the roles, the gender roles. So even if you're in a female female relationship or a male male relationship, you will see them taking on the gender roles. Now, we all don't do this because I don't believe in it, but a lot of people do. You will see this commonly. So you see the female doing the regular female role stuff, and you see the other female, or if it's a male male, you see one of them taking on the roles. Now, like I said, I don't do this, and many of us are against it, but it happens a lot, and you will see this happen throughout time. Hey, hey, Miss Grant, good to see you. All right, guys. So those are the three questions in the comment that I was supposed to address before we got started. Now we can get started. All right. First and foremost, we're going to page 6. And the first thing that it says here on page 6 that we're supposed to discuss before we start the questions, we have 4 questions to do. The first thing that Marshall says to us is that because of what the word marriage means in many of our societies, he says here that some of the times our relationships suffer because we are going off of what was taught to us marriage means. So marriage means you do this. Marriage means you don't do that. And he said what it boils down to in many cases is us playing up to these roles that I mentioned before. So the first one we're supposed to discuss before we get into the questions is ownership. Marshall says that on the subject of marriage, that he stopped calling his wife my wife. So instead of saying my wife, my husband, he said that he doesn't use my. He took that away. And the reason why is he said in the roles that it's ownership. So it makes him think of his wife as his property. And once upon a time, legally, that was the case. Legally, if you married a man, you were his property. So he says that he stopped calling her my wife because it takes him back to a time when his wife would have been perceived as his property. So he'll call her his. He didn't say exactly what he does call her. He just said he took away the concept of my wife. So as we read further, we'll see what may be more appropriate to call your spouse, your partner, maybe even those words, partner, spouse, those kind of things. All right. Now he moves down into the concept of nonviolent communication. The first important part to this is that nonviolent communication is a language. It makes it possible for us to connect with one another from the heart. Those of you who've been here for the last 2 discussions, he repeats that, talking about how it's communicating from the heart. So that's the most important part we need to remember going into this segment. Next, he says that some of the times when you're dealing with this marriage concept, people do things because they're supposed to they should, they ought to, or they must. And he said that these things lead us to guilt, shame, unconsciousness, fear, obligation, and duty. And as we're going through the rest of this, you're going to see how when a person does something for those reasons, it makes them, and a lot of times, resent you, and it causes problems in the relationship. And the last part we're supposed to look at before we do the questions is whenever we interact with someone in that way, he says that it gives us to judging, being judgmental, and then we don't like the fact that we have to give in the first place. Again, causing problems in the relationship. So let's take away from this aspect of it that as we're going through this, and this is going to become very important later when we're talking about needs and asking the other person to fulfill your needs. So, what we're going to take away from this is that he says that we're not supposed to do things for obligation and that we're supposed to do things because we want to see our partner happy, because we want our partner to feel better. Okay. All right. Now let's do the questions. So the first part here says learning through 4 questions. He tells us that nonviolent communication is giving and receiving in a way from the heart. So if you are married, if you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a partner, if you are with someone, he says he wants you to think about your spouse or your partner, okay, as you're answering these questions. If you are single, you can focus on a different kind of relationship just for the purposes of this example. But he said to choose someone you're very close to. So you could choose your child, your best friends, somebody like that, because they're going to be asking us to think of real situations that we've already experienced. So he wants us to think of a situation with a person that we're close to and use that for our 4 questions. Okay. So let me see. Who should I use? I'm single and I've been single forever. So I'm going to just use the last person that I was serious about. I'm going to use her and some of the crazy situations we had. So first question. All right, guys, take your pen and your paper. Let me get my pen. And we're going to do our first question. The first question says here, would you tell me? Now, remember, you're imagining the other person. So imagine the other person is saying this to you. And if you want to write your answer in the chat, that would be great. We can discuss it and talk about it. So the first question is this. Would you tell me one thing that I do as your partner or friend that makes life less than wonderful for you? So remember, you're imagining that your husband is saying this to you, your wife is saying this to you, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your best friend, your ex, somebody that you really care about is saying this to you, and answer their question. Now remember, they said one thing. You might have a list. Just give us one thing, it says, that this person does that makes life less than wonderful for you. It goes on. I'm going to continue to read. That's the gist of the question, but I'm just going to give you some more information about the question. It says, could you think of one thing I do or don't do? It could be something they don't do that makes life less than wonderful for you. Okay, so let me think of something she did that made life less than wonderful for me. Something she did or did not do. Okay, and remember, you're supposed to state this in a way that it's not critical and not judgmental. Just state the fact. Okay, so I'm going to say my ex, who was a Cancer. I dated 2 Cancers, a female and a male. Bad idea. Bad idea for Aquarius. I like my Cancers, but I like them as friends. All right, so what did she do? Okay, in this case, I'm talking to her, so I'm going to say you would get drunk and Now, how do I say this without a judgment? You would get drunk and now they said to state the fact. And I'm thinking about this is not easy because I'm thinking about all my feelings about it and all that kind of stuff. So I'm trying to state it. You would get drunk and talk to others in a loud voice. I'm not going to make a judgment about it. I'm just going to say you would get mad and talk to others in a loud voice. So that is something that she would do. She would do that with everybody. Her mom, her son, me, everybody. She would get drunk a lot. A whole lot. So what about you guys? What are some things that you can share that your lover, spouse, husband, wife, mother, sister, best friend, ex would do to you or not do that would make your life less than wonderful? I like the way that question is worded. Less than wonderful. So that's mine. She would get drunk and talk to others in a loud voice. So you see here how I worded that. I could have said a lot more than that, but I did not give any judgment. I did not condemn her. I did not do shoulds and oughts. I just basically said exactly what would happen. She would get drunk and then she would be very, very loud. Okay. All right. That's the first question. Now Marshall tells us to scroll to the next question. So now we have the exact behavior that we're upset about. We have the exact behavior that we don't like. Number 2, the second question here says, let's see, to be able to play the game of giving to one another from our hearts. Your feelings are critical, and I need to be aware of them. So in this one, we have to make the person aware of how we feel about the behavior. So it means, how did I feel when she would do this? Okay. So it says, when I do what I do, how do you feel? That's question 2. So when she gets drunk and talks in a loud voice, how does that make me feel? Now, for those of you that need help with the feelings, if you go to the back of the book on page 66, there is at the top of the page a list of feelings. So how did I feel when she got drunk and talked loud? I felt angry, annoyed, concerned, and embarrassed. Okay. So those are my words. How did I feel? Angry, annoyed, concerned, and embarrassed. Extremely embarrassed. Oh my God, that used to be so embarrassing because she would be like in front of people. It wasn't like something that would happen in the house. It would happen outside, happen at the store, it would happen anywhere. She would go get on the bus, and it would just be so embarrassing. So it was angry, annoyed, concerned, and embarrassed. That's how I would feel. Question 3. Now it says move to the third question. Now it says here, when this person does this, what needs of yours are not getting met? So Marshall gives us a little way to write it. It says, I feel as I do because I would have liked, or I was wanting, wishing, or hoping for. So when she got drunk and I felt angry and embarrassed. And what would I have liked? I feel as I do because I would have liked. What would I have liked? What would I have liked better than what she was doing? Let's see. That's a very good question. I would have liked her not to embarrass me. That's what it was. I would like to have not been embarrassed. Um, okay, so that's what I'm gonna write. What I need in this form. What was my need? My need was for her to not embarrass me. Okay. And four, the last question. The last question says, what can we do to enrich one another's lives? Nonviolent communication is about clearly communicating these four things to people at any given moment. So for number four, we have to write, what could they have done that would have enriched our life, that would have fulfilled the need that we discussed in three. So let's see. Now, please tell me what I can do to make your most wonderful dreams come true. So, what could they have do to make that dream come true? So, for me, it would have been for her to remain sober. She could not handle her alcohol. I would need her to remain sober. All right. So, now we've clearly identified the four things. Not not that they're easy, but we've identified them. So we've identified what the behavior was. The behavior was the drinking and the being loud. We didn't give any judgment to it. I didn't talk about any of the things I could have added to that. I just said plain and simple, you got drunk and you were very loud. Period. Two, how did it make me feel? Angry, annoyed, concerned, and embarrassed. Number three, what needs of mine were not being met while she was doing this? She was embarrassing me, and the need I needed was for her not to embarrass me and be a supportive partner at that time. Last one, four. How can she do this? How can she enrich my life in that way? By remaining sober. Now, nobody is saying that this is going to be easy. Because what I just asked her to do to remain sober for somebody who's an alcoholic is not an easy thing. So remember, some of the things you're going to be asking a person to do are not going to be simple. Okay. That's really important because a lot of these things they're going to have to work on for a matter of time. Now, so you have stated what you feel, you've stated everything. That's the first part. That's the whole first part of nonviolent communication. But you have to state it in that way so that the person doesn't feel condemned or judged. Okay. Now, after we're going to see this in the next section, after you've stated this, the other person is supposed to say what they heard you say. Because if they heard judgment or condemnation, then you're going to have to talk through that aspect, and that could be more of a problem. Okay. So we got through the first four parts. So Marshall says we have to take a look at, for the next two sections, and we're almost done. For the next two sections, we'll take a look at two important things that are important when writing these questions. Number one, criticism. There are two primary forms of communication that make giving from the heart almost impossible for people. The first is anything that sounds to them like criticism. So remember in the very beginning when I wrote my first statement, I said you get drunk and you talk loud. I didn't say you get drunk and embarrass me and act a fool in the neighborhood and everybody know I'm dating you and I'm hurt and upset. I didn't go into all of that. I didn't give her a sermon, I just stated the facts. You do this and this. That's it. I didn't give any criticism about it. I didn't give my judgment about it. I didn't give none of my side smart comments about it. I just stated the facts. So the first thing Marshall says is that when you're talking to the other person, if you want to communicate with them non-violently, you must be careful of that criticism. That criticism kills the whole thing. You can't have a nonviolent communication with somebody while you're criticizing them. And they're going to shut off. They're not going to want to have the conversation. So if I said to her, you're drunk and you're this and you're that, that will shut her right off at the first one. So we're not going to get very far in this communication. So instead of my judgments, my criticism, I pushed them to the side and just stated the facts. you get drunk, and you get loud. That's the facts. Okay. Now he says that by criticism, I mean attack, judgment, blame, diagnosis, or anything that analyzes people from the head. Remember, nonviolent communication isn't about thoughts, it's about emotion. It's about talking to each other from the heart, communicating from the heart. So you're not going to come at them with a technical analysis of what just happened. You're just going to come at them with exactly the facts. Just state the facts and talk to them from your heart. All right, that's the first one, really important. And this is the one that for a lot of people, this is what kills the conversation, because as soon as the other person feels criticized, like I said, they shut off. Number two, you must not give in to coercion. So in here it says that the second block to our ability to give from the heart is any hint of coercion. As a nonviolent communicator, you want to be able to present those 4 things you wrote down such that the other person receives them as a gift, as an opportunity to give, not as a demand or an order. So at the last part, when I talked about what she could do to give me my needs, I asked her to stay sober. So in that part of it, it has to come off as not being a demand. So that's why he had to word it the way that we did, because it says here, to enrich my life, you can remain sober. Now, that's not a demand. That's not a judgment. That's not a criticism. I'm just saying that if you want to enrich my life, you could stay sober. You could remain sober. Now, it's up to the other person if they want to do that or not, but they're not being coerced by me. I'm not saying you stay sober or I'm leaving. That's a coercion. In mine, I invited her to stay sober. All right. And then the last part for today is receiving from the heart. Okay, so now one person is the person who's answering these 4 questions. The other person has to receive. Okay, so no matter who you're doing this with, you and your ex, you and your spouse, you and whoever, one person is giving, one person is receiving. And this goes back and forth throughout the nonviolent communication technique. Marshall had us stop here to talk about receiving from the heart. And then the next time we speak, we'll move on to the next part of nonviolent communication, because we're supposed to practice this part first. Okay? We're supposed to practice how to state those 4 things. So the last part here about receiving from the heart, it says that there are 2 main parts to nonviolent communication. The first is the ability to say those 4 things and get them across to the other person without the other person hearing criticism or demand. Marshall repeats this over and over again throughout the book. They have to not hear criticism or demand. So that's really important in how you word it, also in how they receive it. The other part of nonviolent communication is to learn how to receive these 4 pieces of information from the other person, regardless of whether they speak a judging language or nonviolent communication. So it's the giving and the receiving. So it's all a matter of giving it in a non-judgmental way, in a non-critical way, in a non-coercive way, and receiving it that way. Now, you can't change how somebody receives something, but as we continue to read this, Marshall explains that part as well. In the last section, he says, I realize that all criticism is a pathetic expression of an unmet need. Pathetic because it usually doesn't get the person what they want. So he's saying here that not only does the criticism shut down the other person, but it doesn't get you what you want. So you, and in my case, let's use my example. I've yelled at her, I've berated her, I done screamed at her for getting drunk, criticized her, judged her, been mad, told her I'm leaving her if she don't stop drinking, all this kind of stuff, and it still didn't get me what I wanted. And Marshall is saying that's because by design, it's never going to. By design, criticism, coercion, judgment cannot get you what you want. It's just not going to happen. All right, guys. So we're done with this. That was the last part that we had to do. So what we have to do now going forward, number one, we have to read the next section because now we have to talk about how to respond from a place of nonviolent communication. We got today who's giving. Now the other person is receiving. So we're going to read more. So I'll put what pages we're going to need to read for the next time. I'll put those in the description. But also, we're supposed to practice writing out these 4 things. So remember, I told you only do one thing at a time. So now Marshall wants us to practice other things they did and writing them out in that 4-step question process without criticism or judgment. So I talked about her drinking in this one. The next time I may discuss, for example, you go out and you stay out late. That could be my next one. I didn't like her staying out late because she's out late, she's drunk, and only God knows what's going to happen to her. But I'm not going to say all that in it. All I'm going to say is you go out late and you stay out. That's it. I don't give none of the criticism, none of the judgment that we used to go back and forth with. Okay? All right, guys. So we're done. That was the last part. So what I'm going to do is, because you guys know how the chat section is and how it's hard for me to be able to read them as they're going up, when I'm finished with this, I'm going to get the questions from this week for our next discussion, and I'll answer them at the beginning like I did this time. So I ask you guys to just take your book and work on those questions, those 4 questions for other behaviors that your partner does that you dislike, and work on wording them in a manner that's not what? Judgmental, critical, or coercive. Okay. So if you guys can work on that, in 2 weeks, we'll come together again. We'll talk about the questions that are over here in the comment section. We will also move on to the next part of this. So you got part 1 today. Next time you're going to get part 2. After you get part 2, then Marshall wants us to practice this with our loved ones. So maybe you can ask a sister or a cousin or a best friend, somebody who can practice this style with you. Because once you've perfected how to word it, the next part is practicing it. Okay? All right, guys, it's time for us to get going. So thank you so much for being here on this Sunday. And make sure that you write down those 4. Make sure you have them written so that when we come back together, we can talk about some of the experiences that you have. Now, this is something that can help people a great deal who have problems with communications in their relationships. So it's something that we're going to take our time and really learn to savor this. Okay. So thank you guys for being here, and please come back tomorrow because I have a lot more to say. See you later.